Chapter 14. Kittens Adrift. In a few seconds, Ricky had smothered the flames on his sister's dress. The little girl was crying, but fortunately she was not burned. Her brother's hands, however, were scorched. "Oh, Ricky, look what I've done to you," Sue said between sobs. "I'm terrible sorry." The children ran into the house, and Mrs. Hollister praised her son. She put salve on his burned hands and wrapped a light bandage on them. All this while Sue looked on, wide-eyed. She promised over and over never to go too near a fire again. "I'm sure you won't," her mother said. She asked Holly to play with Sue for the rest of the morning. After they had eaten the fish, Pam helped with the dishes, and Pete trimmed the hedge alongside the garage. When they had finished, Pete decided once again to try to find the prowler whose picture they had taken. He asked Pam to help him. "I'd love to," she said excitedly. "Where shall we look?" "We've never searched along the shore," he replied. Together they started down the pebbly beach of Pine Lake. Most of the people whose property bordered on the lakefront were in their yards. Some were mowing lawns, others were repairing their boats. The children asked each one if he had ever seen a man with a funny little red hat. "No, I never have," they all answered. After Pete and Pam had walked about a mile, they came to a beautiful garden. An elderly woman was weeding a bed of flowers. When the children approached her, she looked up and smiled. "Hello, children," she said. "Oh, aren't you two of the happy Hollisters?" Pete and Pam looked surprised. They had never seen the old lady before. "Yes, we are," Pete said. "How did you know us?" "Oh, everybody in town was interested to know who'd moved into the old house," she answered. "We were told it's haunted," Pam said. "Is it?" "So they say," the woman replied. Then she asked, "Is there something I can do for you?" They told her that they were looking for a man who wore a funny little red hat. The woman put down her trowel and held her lips very tight, as if she were thinking hard. "A funny little red hat," she said. "Yes, I know someone who has a red hat that I would call funny and little." The children were so excited that they both began asking questions at the same time. "Who is he? Where does he live? Can we find him now?" The old lady smiled at their impatience. "You children will not have far to go," she said. "The man who owns the hat lives right next door." Pete and Pam were amazed and a little bit frightened. How would they capture the man? Would they get him to admit that he was the prowler? What had he done with their toys and with the important suitcase which belonged to their father? "Thank you very much," said Pete. "We'll go now to see this man." "I hope you find him home," the woman replied. The next house was only a stone's throw away. As the children approached it, Pam asked, "How can we ever capture him, Pete?" I guess we'll just have to grab him," her brother replied. By this time they were near the steps of the house. Suddenly the front door swung open. A very stout, jolly-looking man with rosy cheeks and a bald head came towards them. "Hello, children," he said. "Are you looking for chores to do? Would you like to cut my lawn?" "No, sir," Pete said. "We're looking for the man with the funny little red hat." The man looked quite surprised. First he looked at Pam, then at Pete. "I guess you came to the right person," he said. "I'm the man with the funny little red hat." "You?" the children exclaimed together. They knew at once that they had the wrong person. Such a fat man could never squeeze through their cellar window. And besides, this man looked so honest, he could not possibly be a thief. "I guess we have the wrong man," Pete stammered. He quickly told the man about the prowler and the clue of the little red hat. Pete asked him please to keep this a secret because they did not want word to get around that would warn the thief they were on his trail. "I'm sorry to hear about your trouble," the man said, "but, there must be many of these little red hats around." He explained that a farmer friend of his who lived down the road had given the little red hats to his helpers when they worked in the fields. The man had a few left over, and had given them to several of his friends. That's how I got mine, the fat man said. Pete, let's ask the farmer about all the people who got hats, Pam suggested. The man told them where Mr. Hill lived, and they set off. When they reached the white farmhouse, a kind-looking woman who was sitting on the porch spoke to them. Are you looking for somebody here? When Pete told her they would like to speak to Mr. Hill, she said she was his wife and led them into the big kitchen. Her husband, a strong-looking, sun-tanned man, was seated at a table drinking a glass of milk. Good morning, children, he greeted them. Will you join me in some nice fresh milk? I just got it from Bossy a little while ago. Before Pete and Pam could say yes or no, Mr. Hill had poured them 2 tall glasses of creamy milk. They thanked him and began to drink. They were not used to warm milk, but this tasted delicious. Pam told the farmer of their search for the man wearing a funny little red hat. And why? They had heard he'd given out some hats. Said the farmer. That is a strange story. Did the hat look like this one? He stepped into the hall and brought back a small red hat. Its shape was just like the outline of the one snapped by the flash of Pete's camera. That's it all right, the boy exclaimed. I picked these little hats up at a carnival last year, Mr. Hill said, and handed them out to my helpers. What did this fellow look like, the one who was prowling around your house? Pete said that they did not know, but he was roughly dressed. This did not help much to identify him, as all the farmhands dressed that way. Do they live around here? Pete asked. The farmer said no, that most of them were migrants, that is, they came from faraway places and worked at farms wherever the crops were ready to be picked. But wait a minute, Mr. Hill said, stroking his chin. There was one man who stayed around here. He was real thin and had close-set eyes and black hair that stuck up straight. Funny-looking fellow. I saw him in town only a month ago, but I didn't stop to talk to him. Who was he? Pete asked eagerly. His name is Bo Stankel, the farmer replied. Where does he live? I don't know, but I'll keep my eyes open, Mr. Hill promised. We'll look for him too, Pam said. The children thanked the farmer for his information and hurried home as fast as they could. When Pete and Pam reached their own yard, and before they could tell the others of the new clue, they saw Sue and Holly crying. What's the matter? Pam asked them. Little Sue was crying too hard to speak, but Holly said that Whitenose and her kittens were gone. Somebody must have taken them. Probably Joey, Pam said. Mrs. Hollister came out of the house. She said she had seen a boy running across the lawn, but had thought nothing of it until the children noticed the kittens were gone. Which way did he go, Mother? Pete asked. Mrs. Hollister pointed toward Sunfish Cove. This was a little inlet of shallow water, which got its name from the sunfish living there. Let's look there, Pete said. The 4 hurried toward the cove. What a strange sight greeted them. Far out from the shore, on a wooden raft, sat Whitenose and her 5 kittens. Oh, the poor kitties, Sue wailed. They'll get drowned. Whitenose was doing her best to get off the float, but every time she walked to the edge to look for something else to jump on, it would tilt dangerously. We have to do something right away, Pam said. Pete thought he would swim out. But just then he spied a canoe slipping around the edge of the cove. A large man was seated in the back. He was paddling with long, strong strokes. Pete, Pam said excitedly, that's Bill Barlow, the bachelor, in the canoe you sold at the trading post. It is, Pete exclaimed. He shouted at the paddler. Bill turned his head. When he saw the children waving their arms, he paddled rapidly towards them. Hello, he said. You sure sold me a fine canoe. I've never had one as good as this. Pete said he was glad Bill was satisfied. He had a favor to ask of him. Would he please save the cat and kittens out on the raft? The man looked in Whitenose's direction. I'll be glad to, he said. How in the world did they get out there? We think a cruel boy did it. Pam answered. With a few deep strokes, Bill reached the side of the raft. Holding it close to the canoe, he lifted the kittens off one by one into the bottom of the canoe. Whitenose jumped in by herself. "They're saved! They're saved!" Sue cried gleefully, jumping up and down. The man brought them safely ashore. How the children hugged their pets. "Oh, Whitenose, I thought you were never coming back," Holly said. The mother cat rubbed her head against Holly's ankles, as much as to say, "I'm so glad to be back with you again." The man in the canoe said goodbye and paddled off. Soon he disappeared around the bend in the cove. Just then a boy came into sight, Joey Brill. "Did you put Whitenose and her kittens on the raft?" Pete wanted to know. "I'm not saying I did or I didn't," Joey replied. "Well, if you did, you're horrid," Pam exclaimed. "I'm glad they don't live with you anymore." The children put the animals on the ground. At once Joey started to pick them up. As he did, they heard a dog barking. Out of the high grass bounded a large black dog. With a growl, he dashed straight for Whitenose and her kittens.